When we're creating a workflow and sending an email message, it's great if we know ahead of time who we should be addressing that message to. For example, in the first stage, we knew to send it back to the submitter, and we can grab that information very easily out of our SharePoint item. We know that Mark is the finance VP, and we know that Carol is the HR VP. Those are knowns. The one that is unknown is the area VP review. And I left a comment here that we're going to need to do a lookup out of the departments list in order to get that information. So I want to show you how you retrieve an email address, but you could be retrieving anything. What we're basically doing is creating a lookup similar to a lookup that you might create in Microsoft Excel. We're going to say we have a value here. We're going to take our value, go to another list, look for a match to that value, and then retrieve another column. So I have a customer number. I'm going to a list of customers, find that same number and pull back the customer's address, pull back the customer's tax rate, whatever it is we want to pull back out of a different column. That's how this works. And of course, it's a different column. If it was the same column, we wouldn't need to do a lookup. We already have the information in the matching column. So what we're going to do is email these users and click to, and if we want to look up information, we're going to use workflow lookup for a user and click add. This is the same dialog that we saw when we chose, for example, the user who submitted the form, or we want to look for a particular piece of information within the current item, but we don't want to look in the current item. We have a list of departments that has the information in it that we need, and I want to show you that list in SharePoint real quickly. So here's the departments list. It has the following fields: department, which is the name, the full name of the director, and in some cases that's not occupied because we're actually emailing, for example, in the case of marketing, we're sending this to an inbox essentially for the marketing department, not to the director of marketing. But this is the director's email, the title of that director if there is one, an organizational area, and whether or not this is an active address. So this list has a different purpose. Somebody else is maintaining this for us. That's great. So when we're looking for a list that we can grab information from for a workflow, we want to know that that list exists, that no one will change its structure without letting us know because, for example, if someone decides to rename these fields, it might give us an issue. Or if they decide to delete columns, we'll definitely have a problem. So a known list that somebody is maintaining. If we don't have one of those, we'll create that list ourselves in SharePoint so that we can make sure that the information that we're relying on for our workflow is solid information that's well maintained. Let's slide back over to SharePoint Designer now. And we want to do a lookup for a person or group in that departments list. So there are a whole bunch of data sources here, everything that's in SharePoint. The current list is just part of it, but we have the history and task lists that are set up for the workflow. We have our documents library, our mentor reports, but here's departments. We're going to grab it right here. And it says at the top, the field to retrieve data from. So in the departments list, we're fishing for an email. These are the fields in the departments list, and we want director email right there. And it will come back as a string. So that's cool. We're going to the departments list and grabbing the director email, but how do we know which one we want to bring back? Well, that's what we're going to set here in the Find the List Items section. We're going to say that we have a department name right here. So we want to search through that department column, and the value that we're going to place on that is we're going to look in the current item for the department. So let me be clear what we're doing here. We're saying that in the departments list, we want to return the director's email, and we want the row or the record where the field department in the department's data source matches the field department in the current item. Looks good to me. Now, it's possible that there are multiple email addresses for the same department in the list. There's no enforced uniqueness on the department name. Because of that, when I say OK, SharePoint Designer is going to say the lookup that you defined is not guaranteed to return a single value. In other words, somebody might have added 5 email addresses for the sales department. And it says if more than one value comes back, I can only send an email to the first one. Is that okay? And I'm going to say, yes, it is. I might want to actually enforce some uniqueness in that department's list, but it's not my list. So I have to have a conversation with whoever owns that list and make sure that that would be fine to do and that they'd be happy to do it for me. So I'm going to say okay, and there is the director email for the departments. And we, of course, then would continue entering the information for this message. We have to at least enter a subject or we can't even save this form. So you have a new position request to review. We would put some more information in it. Maybe the name of the position. We'd put a encoded absolute URL here. Everything else. But all of those things we already know how to do. What we need to know how to do here is how to go grab a piece of information using a lookup, and that's what we've done. So we're using email in exactly the same way as when we emailed the submitter, and exactly the same way we would, for example, if we hard-coded an email in. I want to make one more point about this before we leave. There's a huge benefit to having this table rather than typing in email addresses. So even though we know Mark Lassie's email, and we could go click on these users and type his email in, down the road in the future, if Mark is transitioned to a more important job outside of finance, or if Mark decides that somebody else in finance should actually be taking in this information, maybe that the way that they're doing this in the marketing and sales departments where they're sending to a departmental inbox is better than all of them flooding into his inbox. If the email changes and we've typed an email in, we've entered it or chosen a person, then what we're going to need to do is come back in here and modify our workflow. So we've entered Mark, and he's right there, but now I'd have to modify the workflow. So there's a benefit to me to look up every single one of these, to actually have a table, either an agreement that that department's table has the default contact that can be used not just to reach the department, but for workflows as well, or to set up my own list of departmental workflow IDs. Perhaps it would be good for all of my workflows, maybe only for this particular workflow. My workflow will be much easier to maintain if I have the choice to simply go edit a list and change the email address, rather than needing to go into not just one, but perhaps multiple workflows to say, it's not actually Mark Lassie getting these anymore, it's finance at Inside NOI. So something to consider, even when you know the email address, I think that you're better off looking it up because it makes your workflow far more maintainable.